the worst all-time trades, right? We gave up Jonathan Taylor for Michael Thomas coming off of that monster season, and that hasn't been good.
Yeah, I do remember that, and I was like, ooh, that's bold, but I was like, yeah, that could work.
Well, we love Taylor too, so to do it, I mean, and then have it work the way it did, but
yeah, that's tough for sure.
I'm just taking Matt Corral right now, so I don't have to think about this during the show, fellas.
He likes to go into the show with an open mind.
I don't want to have like my eye on the computer.
Well, I'm gonna have to call you right after the show ends, Theo, because we're on the clock on our 12:50 triflex.
Oh my gosh! Okay,
we're gonna have to sort that out too after this.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll all be on the clock in about 3 or 4 leagues by the time the show's over. So.
Oh yeah.
I'm currently on the clock in multiple leagues, but I'm not even looking at it. So I'm ready to rock, fellas, whenever.
As long as there's time left, right, boys? You guys ready to rock this or what?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay.
District, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text. That trash offer's the best. You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the and I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
What is up, Fantasyland? We are back in the district, and like we do it on the reg, tonight is a monster show. One of the biggest guests we've had tonight. All 4 of the GOATs made sure they were on tonight with this man. And we're not going to waste time tonight, guys. You all know who we are. You know what we do on the regular. Make sure you tune in. Smash the subscribe, the like. You know him from Rotoviz, stealing bananas, ship chasing, crushing fantasy leagues like it's nobody's business. Mr. Shawn Siegele, welcome to the GOAT District.
How's it going, gents? Excited to be here.
Doing great. And I'll add for our high stakes listeners, Shawn did take down an FFC primetime, which we've had a couple of those on the show, so it's nice to have another one in here.
Love it.
Yep,
it's kind of you to mention that. That was fun.
Yeah, that nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
I love seeing the smile peek through. It's like, oh yeah, I did that too. Yeah, big smile.
All right, so guys, we have a big show tonight. Like we said, we got the whole crew on the line. We got a loaded show. In the chat, guys, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Keep the questions coming, the comments. We love all of it. Make sure you smash the like. Theo, I'm going to let you start this off. I'll bet any money that I have that this thing goes off the rails, no doubt, because I already have a million other questions from what I've seen on the show sheet. So I'm going to let you start, and then we'll see where this thing goes. But start it off, brother.
No, I'm sure we're going to Galaxy brain it tonight. This is a great one. We're all in the middle of our rookie drafts. But we want to first ask a couple questions about you and Rotoviz. You're synonymous with the zero RB strategy. Now with the rise of hero RB and the principles of zero RB being more commonly used, like pretty much every high stakes draft you do now, I'd say about half the members are going hero RB. How can fantasy players still get an edge using that sort of a strategy?
Well, it's interesting because I think there are a couple of ways, and they're going to sound like contradictions, but the most straightforward way is just that I think that a lot of people are kind of moving in that direction. A lot of the elements that we've discussed for a long time now we're very much mainstream. And so that's kind of good and bad. I mean, the whole time, through all those years where people are just like, what you do doesn't work. You're kind of making up these results. The evidence isn't behind it. The tactics aren't solid. You're like, well, you don't want to hear people criticizing what you do. At the same time, then you can still play it and it works. Once people start to agree with you, then a lot of those exploitable opportunities do go away. And so from a playing perspective, that part is frustrating. It becomes more challenging. And yet I do think that a lot of the players who go about zero running back, especially, which is a little bit trickier, I think, than sort of the hero RB approach, still don't do it right. And sometimes we'll have people come to us and say, look, we did this. And, now we're even more convinced you don't know what we're talking about because it didn't work at all in our league. And one of the things that you will see is that drafters did start with wide receivers, but then they went off too early and they panicked. They got in a situation where they wanted to start taking running backs and build this sort of balanced team that you kind of always think about or traditionally would have done. But when you do that, you start to give away that wide receiver value in 5, 6, 7, 8, and you're drafting running backs into this area that's still not very strong, right? You've got to be more patient, more aggressive, and you've got to draft teams that you're uncomfortable with. The same thing is true a little bit, I think, with the hero RB. Once you have that first running back, you just have to hammer the receivers. Ideally, you want to be strong at some of those other positions as well. You don't want to get too aggressive, but being very good at the onesies and maximizing your starting lineup is something that's going to help you in all leagues, right? You only get to play so many players. Those guys who are actually in the lineup, they need to be good. And so there are some advantages you can get there. So I think just actually doing it correctly is one where you can still get an advantage. But then the other thing, which is sort of a contradiction, is to say, look, we have these opportunities now that didn't used to exist, where there are some fun running backs who fall, and not just fun, but running backs with sort of interesting profiles. And at the same time, because so many people are going wide receiver early and heavy, it does change up some of the wide receiver values in that area where, you look at the history and it's just like wide receivers crush, running backs are terrible, but ADP shifts do matter. And so especially now in the NFL where we have so many quarterback situations that are sketchy, right? You have to look at whether or not you want those players. And I think that, I had this experience last year. I know many listeners will have as well. But like if you had a DJ Moore or a Terry McLaurin, those guys are virtually unplayable if you're trying to win big money down the stretch. And they're still expensive now. And most of those problems are still there. Do you pivot off of some of those guys? And part of it is just player selection. I think sometimes people want to say player selection doesn't matter at all. It's just the structure. I think both parts are fun. If you don't want to pick players, then, don't just do it for the structure, right? So kind of melding those things, I think, is where you can still get the advantage. And 2022 will be very interesting because there are going to be some traditionally bad constructions that I think people get some cool results with this year.
I know. Oh, go ahead, Theo.
No, I was going to say 2022 is interesting, though, because I know Dan and we just did an NFFC RotoWire Online Championship draft, and we started with Jefferson at the 103, and it feels like Kupp, Jefferson, and Chase are all going to go in that top 6 or 7, so it might push other wide receivers up. So it might be a few interesting builds like that. Is that kind of how you're seeing it?
Yeah, one of the things with the hero running back is just that, where do you take it? Last year, round 2 was so successful. That's probably not going to hit exactly like that again. So if people are chasing a very specific thing from last year, that part is going to be a little bit tricky. But yeah, the wide receivers are going to be better than the running backs after the first 2 spots for a lot of the first round. And so then you're already off to this kind of fun zero RB-ish approach. And then it's a matter of, do you sprinkle in some type of anchor running back, or do you go full zero RB and think, I've got guys in the 9, 10, 11 range that I like, and then maybe more guys in the 17, 18, 19 range that I like, and I'm comfortable trying to hit on those. And we know that last year was phenomenal in some ways because you have Fournette and Patterson throughout most of the regular season, and then you have Singletary and Michelle and Rashad Penny hit at the end. And so depending on what your mix was, last year was very favorable. You're not going to get quite that lucky every season. But again, over time, the results are very good for this.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of it is just being open to, instead of trying to solve for last year, last year's season has already played out, and there's just so much analysis out there that just tries to solve last year and what we should have done last year. And really we have to think about, what does that actually mean for this year with, the NFL has already shaken the Etch-a-Sketch, and we have to start from scratch, and we have to figure out, Leonard Fournette is a completely different player at a completely different value right now than he was before. So are we saying, do we want to pick Leonard Fournette in the second and third round, and we're saying that's a great pick? Or are we saying you got to go out there and you got to find that Leonard Fournette in like the 8th, 9th, 10th round and do it that way? And really both parts are, I think, critical to really putting together a good strategy and system for this year.
No, absolutely.
Andrew, did you have? Sorry, I think Andrew had a cue to throw in there.
No, not nonsense. No? Maybe you're immune to it now, Shawn. But have you noticed you're better at sticking to the hero or zero RB strategy in like the slow versus the live drafts? Because I'll just tell you, in slow drafts, and Dan knows this because we just did a triflex together. I literally texted him like, hey, like I can steel my stomach, like through like the next like 2 to 3 rounds or whatever of not taking a certain position or being without a pick or whatever. I have found it's easier for me to psych myself up and go scream in a closet or something to tell myself, don't take this running back, don't take this running back, don't take this running back, and then smash a wide receiver, as opposed to the live drafts. I can somehow sometimes resort back to bad tendencies. Have you noticed it easier over the years to kind of steel yourself, as you were saying, make yourself uncomfortable in the draft rooms?
It's an interesting question. I mean, through the sort of 2008 to 2014-ish time period, I did so many live drafts and often did these high stakes drafts, sort of 2 and 3 at a time. And so the processing of how those drafts go and the frequency of it made it kind of easy to go through and execute the plan there. It's almost a little bit more of a struggle, I think, in the slow drafts, because there's so much time, and by the time you're on the clock, you want to do something cool, you overthink it. But the main problem that I have in all drafts, as opposed to, I think, what a lot of people have where they kind of get pulled back to trying to be balanced, is as I start to draft the team, it just is so all in that at some point you're like, draft a running back or draft a wide receiver. I mean, there'll be some drafts I do where start with some running backs and the value seems to be there. And this seems crazy for a zero RB person, but it's just like, I just want to draft running backs or I just want to draft receivers. I mean, the team that Blair Andrews and I drafted in the main event a couple years ago that ended up finishing 31st, disappointingly on a stat correction, dropped out of the top 30. We actually took our first running back in round 11. And at that point, we were still like just trying to force ourselves to actually take one. We went, wide receivers, QB, tight end through the first 10 rounds. And I don't know. I find actually coming back to the other positions is more of a problem than being too balanced.
Interesting. Yeah, and I just to add on to that, I mean, I think what's really interesting, especially if you go too far down the rabbit hole, I have found, is sometimes you get disgusted even having if you go down the wide receiver path, it's sometimes hard because the running backs do get pushed up. So by the time you're taking one, maybe in the 11th round, you're still disgusted with the options, and maybe you're still thinking to yourself, I want to go somewhere else, but maybe I know I have got to I got to go running back here because I got to relieve the pressure out of the system or something. So sometimes it gets just so gross, you feel disgusting about it. But that's just how I get in the slow drafts.
Yeah, I basically had to hold Andrew down and force him to take the single.
I refuse to click the button.
He's a receiver whore.
Andrew says, you're going to have to click the button on this one, Dan. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I always hope I get the 101 with Andrew, because then there's
at least there's no discussion.
Yeah.
He probably still.
Taylor.
I bet you he still tries to discuss it though.
No. I'm really good at the 101.
The 101 we're usually good at.
I'm good.
Occasionally you get the hey, do you want to get crazy this draft? No, not when we have the 101. But that usually he'll take Jonathan Taylor, so that's at least he'll stick to that one.
Yeah.
And then how about how do we take the zero RB and hero RB strategy and apply it to dynasty startups? That it almost naturally works better in these dynasty startups, would you say? Because of the players holding value, or is that something where you might want to even pivot differently?
I like to go very wide receiver heavy still. It does depend on the format and how many guys you can start. One of the things to talk about a lot for Dynasty is that you need to build a better than the best possible redraft team, and probably better by a substantial margin. And so at some point, running backs probably come into that if you have a relatively shallow starting lineup, right? But I mean, that's one of the reasons why the triflex is so fun. It goes so wide receiver heavy there. I've got a kitchen sink league with Ryan McDowell where the team has actually done extremely well. I mean, you have some other players in some other positions, but kind of going through the years, it started out with Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson when they got hurt, and then, have this epic year when Christian McCaffrey scores, but has McCaffrey and he gets hurt. Saquon Barkley, and so you're kind of moving through those guys over this very long period of time. And so finally, recently, I just gave up McCaffrey and Barkley again and said, look, I mean, this is a 10 starting lineup league, and you only have to play one running back. Let's just go basically all wide receivers. Those guys, you can get the value easier. They're going to hold the value longer. And just like in a zero running back approach in redraft, you can blitz people with your wide receiver points. One of the things we talk about zero RB, what are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to get 6 of the top 15 wide receivers, right? And that may take drafting more than just 6, because you're not necessarily, people aren't going to just give you 6 of the top 15, even if you start that way. But you're going after that. If you can get that in Dynasty too, I mean, you can really put it on your opponents. I'm in 3 triflex leagues right now. I think I am on the clock in the rookie draft in all of them. So I apologize to people in my league there. But in those leagues, this is the sort of the second year for it. Obviously, we're doing the rookie draft. And in 2 of the 3 leagues, just have 2 running backs total. One of them has Etienne and Dobbins. That's kind of a nice little start. And then the third one, it kind of has Barkley, Rojo, and James Conner. So you kind of like that little nucleus. But then, one of the things, and we can talk about triflex as much as you guys are interested in, but because we traded down in the startup, we're in a situation where once we make all of our rookie picks, we're in all 3 of these leagues, I'm going to have like 30, 32 players. And so then you have this off season where you can watch the guys play, and obviously you're making picks that you think will increase in value, but then you got to get back down to 20. So it'll be an interesting off season trying to shave 10 guys off of the roster without, just giving value away. So that part of it will be interesting. Can you move some of those wide receivers for running backs if in fact that's what you want to do?
Shawn, can you, we got a question from the chat, Famous J dropping a question, just defining zero RB maybe for newer players or just to define, because, there's kind of a gray area, right? So is doing 1 receiver, 2 tight end, 3, or I guess these are his picks. So I guess if he's going receiver, tight end, receiver, QB, running back, he's asking, is that considered zero RB, or where do you have to start taking RB to consider that strategy, sorry.
Yeah, a lot of people look at it in a lot of different ways. And I mean, I definitely tried not to have the approach of somehow I get to define the conversation for everybody, obviously. But looking at that.
Define it, Shawn. Take a stand.
Define it. Yeah.
Define it.
Setting in stone.
That's right.
Yeah, I like getting the onesies in there. If you're getting star players, we know the elite tight end in almost all formats. I mean, if you have a good tight end, it's almost like having an extra player. So from this idea of maximizing your starting lineup, again, that's very helpful. I tend to not look at it as zero RB unless you have 4 wide receivers before you take your first running back. I mean, at least 4 non-running backs to start would be like the very softest version of it. But I tend to think of it as a more aggressive approach than just that.
I want to throw a quick one in because I'm in round 2 right now of my first triflex this year, doing a 250 dynasty. I'm curious how you balance the quarterbacks in. Obviously, you're going aggressive with the receivers early, and that's, I think, as a team, that's kind of what we like as an approach. But where are you balancing in those quarterbacks? How you managing that in those first few rounds to make sure you don't miss anything, but then still get that value in other positions?
Yeah, the super flex part makes it so fun because it creates a much fairer dynamic through the first round. And I think people love playing the quarterbacks and having them matter. And then they also love playing the quarterbacks and having the first round in a startup be fair. Because if you don't have super flex, then there's just this massive difference between people who get top 3 or 4 picks and people who get 9, 10, 11, 12, almost to the point where, those folks are like, we'll play for 1 year and then you're going to have to find new people. But anyway, the QB part is a lot of fun. I was looking at my rankings before the show because one of the show sheet questions was about, where do we put Chase and Jefferson in there? And it was almost a little bit of a surprise to me when I was looking at it. I have Chase at the 102. Obviously, I think you can have the 4 quarterbacks I think are superstars. Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, a little bit out of fashion because of what happened last year. They probably still are the 2 guys with the most absolute upside. And so you could see putting them in. There's the question of how they'll age for dynasty purposes. And so, that also is a little bit of a wrinkle. And then you have Herbert and Burrow coming in as the other sort of the 2 young guns. Will they be able to put up enough passing points to kind of match this other group? I mean, it's those 6 guys along with Jefferson, Chase, at the beginning, Pitts and Taylor. I mean, I think that's the group that you look at as your tier 1, and it's going to be a little bit personal preference how you move it in. I think that, and one of the fun things even in the super flex, if you get that early pick, you can trade down to later in the round, pick up some extra value, start yourself off. I mean, just anytime you get lucky, you want to take advantage of it and move down and get more points or more picks, what have you. So I'd like to get the anchor QB in these Triflex ones that we did. I think in both of them, or one actually, Burrow fell. So, I mean, you're looking for the situations where you actually think ADP is wrong. And last year we thought Burrow was wrong. In the first half of the year, you're like, well, I don't know. Second half of the year, it seemed pretty clear cut. That you kind of like. In another one, we actually traded back up later after we'd acquired just so much that we couldn't really use it all. It's again this question of like, how do you manage your roster? I think in the FFPC leagues, that's pretty fun. Obviously, when you play the home leagues that have 30, that's a blast. You can stash all your guys you want to stash in the FFPC, Rotoviz, Triflex. I mean, you can't really stash the guys the same way, but the tactics of managing those roster spots is just really, really interesting. So anyway, moved back up, got Kyler Murray, and then in the third one, we got kind of 3 bad quarterbacks. For the QB2, I like a bad quarterback, or at least a contingency-based sort of play, to where if he hits, like a Daniel Jones, I mean, he's extremely inexpensive, but there is at least some small chance that he hits. He's got some good receivers now, got a better coaching staff, very athletic. He could run and create a lot of points for you that way. If things fall a little bit, I mean, his price is kind of crazy. I mean, it definitely is priced as though this is his last year as the starter. I think there's at least a chance that that's not the case, where for a lot of the other guys down there, I mean, Carson Wentz is not a good player. Matt Ryan is at the very end. There are 2 or 3 other guys. I mean, Marcus Mariota is interesting with Ritter now. And with the veterans in the rookie draft, we're currently on the clock in a league at the 210. Where you're like, I mean, do you take Mariota? Because, I mean, there's a chance that he blows up.
Right.
I mean, one of the problems with both Ritter and Mariota is that neither one of them could be the starting QB next year. And then both of their values go to 0. But there's also a chance that one of the 2 of them grabs it, in which case, you got to that high value QB at a very manageable price.
Jay, can you pull up that board to maybe pick Shawn's brain a little bit?
I'll work on that. Throw in another question from the chat if you've got one, or another one, and I'll pull that up right now.
Sure.
Right.
Did you talk about any gal branding this weekend?
What's that?
I don't. I love it.
Should we talk about any gal? So I've been known to gal brand a time or two. Shawn, did you have any spots in your drafts, in the rookie drafts, where you were galaxy branding a pick where you particularly stuck, or found yourself making one particular choice more often than others?
Well, the hiccup that we have run into in basically all of the drafts that I'm in right now, where we have a ton of second round picks, a ton of third round picks. We have guys we like, but you're trying to maximize the value and you're trying to maybe move some value into 2023. That's always the interesting part of the Triflex too, is how do you keep some value somewhere else because you can't use it all. And the problem that I've run into is that I thought that Damien Pierce was going to be more popular because even though, like in our Rotoviz tools, I mean, he looks like a non-prospect just completely. But I do understand that there are a lot of people who like him. He breaks some tackles. Then he goes to the situation in Houston where you could see him as the starting running back. And you're thinking, okay, well, our ADP, the ADP pulling into our tools suggests he's like 204, 205. But in the drafts that I'm in where he's fallen to 208, 209, 210, nobody wants him. And even once he's fallen, you can't move the pick for something exciting. So that part of it, I think, is interesting. Some of those guys, Pierce versus Spiller at running back there, and how you manage the running backs in the second round, I think has been an interesting dynamic in rookie drafts so far.
For me, it was Garrett Wilson versus Jameson Williams at the 106. I had that to make that decision so many times, and every time it was a hard decision. I ended up with more Garrett Wilson than Jameson Williams, and I wish I would have added a little bit more Jameson Williams. So for me, that was like the 106 was like super tough. I feel like those guys were there. There was one league where I actually managed to pick up the 7th pick, and I got both of them, which I was really happy about. But that decision was just a tough one. It's almost like you could see either of those guys having just dynamite careers. Maybe both of them do, but you always feel like you maybe missed out. Dan, did you have any really, really hard rookie selections?
For the most part, no. What I've been frustrated mostly by on this draft is just the crappiness of the running backs in general. I mean, it's either you got the 101, 102, or you're already taking pot shots.
Agreed.
And that,
especially if you like drafting that position in rookie drafts, right, Dan?
Right, exactly. And and this is and it makes it really tough. When you have interesting players like David Bell or John Mechie, or you're passing over Wan'Dale Robinson. You're passing over guys like these to take a Damien Pierce, and the grossness of it. I just want to take a shower every time that I even consider it. So, and so far I haven't been able to do it. I have tried to get a Rashad White or two. Haven't been able to manage it. You
got to get him at the back end of the first if you want him. That's where I took him.
I did hold my nose and grab an Isaiah Spiller share, but other than that, I'm kind of dropping down to the Tyler Algier area. That kind of place is where I can start. I can draft those running backs and not feel quite so bad about it.
Yeah. Shout out to our loyal listeners. I did end up with a lot of Trey McBride, which I was thrilled about. The guy
how did we not know that?
We've been talking about awesome. for months. They're months. So how about you, Andrew? What was your hardest selection this weekend, or if it kept coming up?
Verbal meme: one Spider-Man with 2021 Pat Fryermuth over him, and the other Spider-Man pointing back at him saying 2022 Trey McBride, and that was like Theo this weekend.
We can only hope. We can only hope for two moose.
I'm going to throw. Oh, sorry, Andrew. Go ahead, buddy.
Oh no, I was going to say my toughest decision was diversification at like the 110. Whenever Skye Moore dropped, I had a real tough time convincing myself to get a pretty even split. And these guys, Theo, Dan, JD, were really good moral support and therapy session of no, you got to mix in some Pickens. Don't forget that Pickens rhymes with Higgins. Print the damn shirts. So that was tough. I only mixed in one Jahan Dotson. I just found whenever Skye Moore fell there, especially in those triflex leagues, maybe Kenny Pickett, push him down to the 110. If he was ever there this weekend, I was taking him, and I kind of felt uncomfortable about how much I was grabbing him, but I really did not make it an even split behind Skye Moore and Pickens. So I guess I'm all in on the Skye Moore aspect, and I think that I'm really exposed to being wrong, so I'm gonna have to figure that out somehow. But it was just too fun to draft Skye with two Ys this weekend.
You talked about Dotson, and that's who I just want to ask Shawn real quick. He's kind of a tough one, right? Because you see him kind of linger into the back end of the first, even into the second. I think I got him in there. I'm trying to pull it up as I talk to you, but in the second and a super flex tight end premium where I just couldn't pass him up. I have two picks in a row in the early second. I took Spiller and Dotson just because I told the guys, I don't want no Dotson. I'm not going to be taking him everywhere because he is kind of falling often, but is he value there? Is he a guy you're avoiding? How do you feel about Dotson, Shawn, real quick?
Well, I mean, he's extremely tricky, right? Because you have a player where the profile historically has vastly underperformed draft slot. And so you've got two things kind of working in opposite directions, where you have the draft slot sort of anchoring him to one scoring level, and then he's got all of the red flags that push you down, significantly down into a different scoring level. And then you have this situation where, unlike most of the rest of the guys, it's hard to see him being the wide receiver one there. And then Carson Wentz is terrible, right? And so all of those things make him tricky. I mean, Curtis Patrick and I selected David Bell ahead of him in the Pros versus Joe's draft that we're in with you guys. And I mean, Bell is better and he's in a better situation. Now they're drafted light years apart. And so that part of it, obviously you're taking some risk with Bell. The article that I just published today talks about if you can't afford your favorite rookies, if you've moved out of the first round, and we all have these leagues where for one reason or another that we did sell all the picks. I actually have Dotson as someone who is a good discount candidate for people who miss on Alave, because Alave has a lot of the same red flags. And I think that these two guys are similar in that both of them project to underperform their draft slot, but that still gives you plenty of floor, right? Because they were drafted so early. So I think that kind of way to look at it is interesting. Dotson has still gone above where I think he probably deserves to go, but he's a very wide range of outcomes type of player. I mean, one of the things I've been grappling with is that in a lot of these leagues, and like the Triflex leagues, for example, you're going to look at some veterans being back in the draft, and KJ Hamler is back in the draft in most cases. I mean, Dotson, despite their differences in draft slot, I mean, he's like a poor man's KJ Hamler. And so, I mean, there are some different ways you could play that part of it too. But I mean, Dotson, once you get him at the price that he's going at and you have a top 16 pick at that price, I mean, you're going to be pretty excited.
Shout out to Kevin Wheeler in the chat. He's asking your current thoughts on Curtis Samuel.
Samuel is somebody who I think is just really tricky because we haven't seen him healthy very often. We don't necessarily think that he's capable of a full, well-rounded wide receiver role. They have some more competition there now. The offense is bad. The quarterback is bad. So, I mean, he's going to be somebody who is probably an end of the roster type of player. At the same time, I mean, he's in a coaching staff that really likes him. Players do get healthy sometimes, even after they've struggled for multiple seasons. He's extremely athletic. He's someone who's fun to take a risk on at that price, but I mean, he's definitely an end of the roster kind of guy.
JD, you have that board for the
Yeah, Dan's got it because for some reason I can't get it big enough for you guys.
And real quick too, I just on the David Bell thing, one thing to keep in mind too, and I think Shawn and Curtis were very sharp taking Bell there where they did, is you not only have to look at where does a pick fall in the totality of the NFL draft, but also where does he fall, just in that team specific. What they have available to them draft wise. Like Cleveland only had third round picks available. It was impossible for them to take David Bell in the first or second round without trading up for him, which they knew they weren't going to need to do. So he was actually the third player that they drafted in the third round. And so that gives him kind of, I think, a little bit more draft capital in a certain way than, any other third round wide receiver who might have, had teams that had, 3-4 picks in the first, second rounds. So you have to think about it in that way as well. So that was just my thought on that. Okay. So this is the draft board of the 750 Triflex that we just completed, Theo and Andrew. And Andrew and I, we pushed a lot of our action more towards next year than this year, though we left ourselves some outs to still compete this year, I guess is the best way to say it. Whereas Theo, I think, is more firmly in the let's go win this year. Range.
I traded my first rounder and my second rounder for next year, so this I went for it with this draft big time. But
so
yeah, go ahead.
I think kind of the big question is, just looking at this board, Shawn, and, I know we're kind of hammering you with it. But, as you're looking down this board, what what players really stick out to you as being really good values? What players really stick out to you as being real reaches in this format?
It's interesting to see the weak quarterbacks and the old quarterbacks go in round 5. It gives you a sense of just how valuable they still are. I've got a lot of Mac Jones and Zach Wilson from last season when they were less expensive, and then Wilson was obviously awful. And Jones is somebody who you're kind of struggling to see that ceiling. Now, the interesting part in a Superflex is just that even without the ceiling, the quarterbacks are very, very valuable. But I think that there is an element there where this current group of rookies, we know that they basically may not play. And so obviously your value goes to 0. But you don't have to be good as a young quarterback to have trade value the next season. That's pretty interesting. So that part of it, you like to see. The other thing here that does jump out is kind of where some of these fun running back names are. You have J.K. Dobbins in the 5th. You have Travis Etienne in the 6th. Kenneth Walker there. And then you contrast that with some of the veterans like Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry. Received an offer today during drafts, which was a Cook for Etienne. And originally I was thinking to myself, well, this is kind of an intriguing offer because the person is wanting to get rid of Cook so much that they're actually giving us some other things. And then I looked at it more closely and realized they wanted some stuff back. It's like, well, I'm not going to make that move because Etienne and Cook are pretty evenly valued. And I say that as somebody who, in leagues that are more than a year old, I have a ton of Dalvin Cook because heading into the 2020 season, I mean, he looked like somebody who was going to absolutely explode. And fortunately he did, because then again, what you see here in these drafts is it's very difficult to get out of the running backs, even when they're still playing well. I mean, you're not going to be able to trade them and get value back. And so you've got to factor that into, how you approach the startup. And I mean, the thing that's so fun about dynasty and running backs is how do you score points at the position and yet leave yourself guys that you can move. And dynasty is really so much about the trade value that your roster represents, even more than the scoring. I mean, the scoring is going to track it pretty closely, but the trade value is going to determine how you continue to grow and separate as opposed to run into this kind of cliff. But that dynamic in the triflexes and in just all of the rookie drafts is very fun.
Maybe we could scroll down a little bit on this one. We talk about trying to get wide receiver depth, and I feel like this format, it's very hard to catch up at wide receiver. You always see the worst teams in year 2 are the teams that I feel like maybe pushed wide receiver too far. They might have really good tight ends and running backs, but you have to start 3, and you most likely are starting 5 if your team is good. Is there any specific values that really stand out to you to where guys are going? And I will preface this that this one went before the NFL draft. We started it up, so some of the values might be a little different.
I think we got to what 12.
It was in the
12?
middle. Yeah.
11, 12.
Yeah,
12th
round is where the draft started.
So like Drake London went a little lower than he would have, but yeah, you're right. There's some of those lower names might be a little pushed up now. But is there any veterans that kind of stand out to you that might be, guys people should be targeting, maybe rounds 10 and below?
I guess I don't really think that they are. And that is one of the cool dynamics here. One of the things that we did by trading down is we ended up getting a lot of guys like Fuller and Smith-Schuster. You get some Odell Beckham, had enough picks that we took a Michael Thomas, and then you're hoping that those guys have this little blip where their value increases a little bit and you can flip them. We were able to do that with some of the players. And then fortunately, Juju is somebody who did have a value spike there because he goes to the Chiefs. I think that what you have to do is you have to move down into sort of the 7, 8, 9 range, get a lot of guys. I think there's the tendency, and again, I mean, there's a real tension here because you can only have so many players in this format. You say, okay, well, I've got this great roster, but it's 25 people deep. Those other 5 guys, I mean, you're going to more or less have to cut, right? But you can still move down, try and create the volume of wide receivers. And then in year 2, I mean, in most of these drafts, we had 3 or 4 first-round picks. And so you guys were talking about the interesting choices. This rookie draft to me was fascinating because I think that London versus Burks at the 2-3 or the 3-4, however you're kind of looking at that, is just a It's so close. And then you have, as you mentioned, Wilson versus Williams is so close. And then this one may be a little bit more controversial, but Alave versus Skye Moore is very close. It's a little bit of that same thing of like David Bell versus Dotson, where you're talking about guys who are drafted in different areas. But I mean, Skye Moore was better than about 5 guys who went ahead of him. He's now going to be playing with Patrick Mahomes. So that portion of it, and we actually had a number of times where we tried to move down that one slot and actually got close several times and even had a trade offer pulled back. I don't know if the other manager there was just thinking, actually, I'm okay with Skye Moore, I don't want to move up, or if he ran across something that said, you know, Shawn and his co-managers, they might actually just take Skye Moore, which we did, and we'll get Alave without having to pay. And so that part of it, but then you add those 3 rookies into the team that you had, and suddenly now you're saying, okay, well, we're stacked at wide receiver. I think that is the way to do it, as opposed to once you get into those double-digit rounds. I mean, you're kind of adding players that I don't think are going to help your team. So you're I think wanting to pivot back to sort of the contingency-based QB plays and maybe start to build out your running backs again at that point.
Move down past the 10th round, Dan, just to see kind of what we're looking at for that.
Well,
Thanks.
yeah. Sorry, Dan. Before you do that, can I ask about the stupidity of people, Shawn? Can you look at round 7 or round 6? Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Drake. Like they're going to go in the 3rd and 4th round. We just saw that, Dan, or 4th and 5th round. It was literally everyone knew it was coming. We just had to have the NFL draft. NFL draft happens. Oh, magically they're 2 rounds, but like we learned no lessons. Like this is like a huge discount. Anyways, I don't know what this is. Maybe it's like just a plug to drafting on the FFPC or Rotoviz Triflex before the NFL draft or what this is. But like this is very clearly values in that round 6 to me of like we all know that they were going to be pushed up, and to get those rookie wide receivers in round 6 was just like an unbelievable value compared to the drafts that are going to go off now for startups after the NFL draft.
Yeah, really is a little bit different, but it's going to be hard to trade to Mac, Zach Wilson for those guys at this point.
Well said.
And that's the thing. I mean, as I was looking at the Triflex boards and all that kind of stuff, rounds 2, 3, and 4, I just really haven't had that much interest in most of the players who are going in that range. There's a few definitely, but when you can trade down and you can get multiple 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round picks and, just really jam a lot of picks into that range, even the 9th round, that to me makes a lot more sense rather than, trying to string up, a couple telephone poles in the 3rd and 4th round and then hang a bunch of lower guys in between them. You can get down there and you can just look, it's like shooting fish in a barrel in the 6th, 7th, 8th round. So that's kind of the strategy I've tried to go with.
Yeah, and I thought that's a great point by Dan, because a lot of times, and I'm not sure how the current startups are, but I know that Dan and I were talking about how it's almost like a big tier break once you get to like a certain wide receiver, and then it just sort of ends. It's like, and it's all league specific for sure, but like you start getting super excited to get like Hunter Renfrow in the 11th round, and then it kind of just dies off. So yeah, it's really hard playing catch up. And those rounds are definitely the money ones for getting your like wide receiver 3s. What are the biggest mistakes you're seeing people making? We could start off in general dynasty. What are the biggest mistakes you see people make, during startup drafts? And then we can kind of pivot it over to the Triflex format, Shawn.
Yeah, I think that the tricky part with the startup is just that you do have to draft in such a way that you have multiple paths to victory. And a lot of that is going to come through youth. It's going to come through trade value. It's going to come through taking some contingency-based plays as opposed to low ceiling plays that, again, it's going to be hard for them to help your starting lineup. But the other mistake I think that people can make, I mean, you essentially have 2 ways to approach dynasty startups that will work, right? The one is you relentlessly trade back and try and build for the future. The other one is that you aggressively trade up and in. But when you do that, you still have to take young players and you still have to pass on these veteran values that look so appealing, because the actual point differences are going to be very mild. And if you move in and move up and have a lot of young stars, then you can win right away. But you can also move back out of those players and build your depth through the next 3 or 4 years in such a way that, I mean, you were good at the beginning and you were good always. So, I mean, it's kind of a win-win, right? And it depends on the individual league, just how powerful you can be with that. But if you trade in and trade up, but take the veteran values, in 2 years, your team is going to be bad. And then you're left with this question of, like, how long am I going to be bad? And it's much more difficult to rebuild than it is to not compete in year one. Because if you don't compete in year one, you can build a juggernaut. If you rebuild, that takes forever, and your upside is still probably just being so-so. So I think that would be the thing, is if you go aggressively for year one, still take the young players, even if you think you're giving up some tiny advantages because there's a 29-year-old star there that maybe is better, or at least seems safer than the 23-year-old potential star. It doesn't even really matter how those guys play in that year, though. The following season, even if the 29-year-old star is good and the 23-year-old is iffy, the 23-year-old is still worth more. And so you still have more options for the next season. So I guess that would be the mistake. Basically, anytime you take old players in Dynasty, it just kills you.
Right. So in other words, like, to put a couple names to it, Jalen Waddle over Tyreek Hill.
I think so. And I mean, the one guy who is probably the toughest question, and has been for a while, is Travis Kelce, right?
Right.
Because you're talking about someone who seems ageless, who is still playing very well, even though last year was not as good. And I mean, just the gap from those elite tight ends. So you're sitting there like in the third round and you're thinking, okay, is one player here worth it? Can I move out of that overall approach for one guy and build the rest of the team that way? I think that's an interesting question, because there are going to be some situations, especially if you're talking about, look, I mean, I've got too many players anyway. I mean, can you have one out of your 20 guys kind of outside that fit? That part of it is interesting. But the fact that you've aggressively moved up to start with, you're not going to have quite those same issues with the 20 roster spots. So that part of it factors into.
Right, exactly. And then, so like other examples would be like an AJ Brown versus a Cooper Kupp, or Diggs versus
or Rashad Bateman versus Deontay Johnson, which one of us may have done today and feels really bad about, and is looking for validation on air and is hoping for the best when they say that.
Well,
Deontay's
but
seeing no
good.
validation, so I'm going to go back on mute. Thanks all.
Make him feel better, Shawn.
Deontay Johnson's good, and the quarterback play has to get better. I mean, it's basically impossible for it to get worse, right? I mean, he's the guy there out of that group. Chase Claypool gets hit by Pickens, but Deontay Johnson is still going to be the star.
There you go.
Okay, yep, noted.
And then, is there any other, like Cooper Kupp is kind of an interesting one, because we're taking him as either the wide receiver 1 overall in redraft. At the lowest, he's wide receiver 3 overall in redraft in every single league. But he's getting a little bit older. How are you valuing him in a startup?
One of the ways that I like to look at it is, anytime that you add someone to your roster, you need to be able to play them for 2 years and capitalize on their high scoring level. And then at that point, be able to trade them at still more or less peak value. So if you're looking at a guy and you think that you're going to play him for 2 years, but then after those 2 years, his value will have declined, you probably want to go in a different direction. Now, I mean, one of the things with the older wide receivers is you do see some of these wide receiver profiles will score well into their early 30s. And so if you're talking about like 27, 28, I mean, you could have a 4 or 5 year window where they're very good. But when you make those choices, you have to almost be willing to say, look, I'm just going to ride this to zero, because whether or not they actually have that scoring time period in their 30s, you're not going to be able to flip them. And so you got to just write it down to where the value disappears, which may make sense again in some very limited situations if the rest of your roster is strong enough and you've created enough options in the rest of your guys.
Right. So if you're trading for Devontae Adams or Stephon Diggs, just be prepared to hold to zero.
And do you adhere to the age apex in Dynasty, or is it player specific? And is there value to be had in older players as, more and more Dynasty players, buy into certain age apexes, and, a lot of very smart people are on them?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has always helped me, or one of the things I talk about, is that you want to do what you do well. And I've always drafted the young players well. The teams that I've won with in redraft are often younger than what you would consider like a rebuilding dynasty team. And so I'm very comfortable with the younger players. The older players, I think, regardless of where you pick them, there's usually not going to be this ability to outperform their price, whether that's sort of the ADP or it's the trade value. Now, I mean, if you get into some of these situations where people are basically giving them away for free, the question is almost not even the trade cost, but the roster slot cost, because you're rostering them instead of someone else who is going to increase in value. And so, I mean, even if you were able to, like several years ago, trade for a T.Y. Hilton for nothing, then you still burn that roster spot by having him on your team as opposed to somebody else. And the likelihood that those guys actually win your league for you is, I mean, the extra points, and if they come at the right time, I mean, you're talking about such a narrow type of path, right? The way that you're going to win titles is putting yourself in position to get a bye every season. Now, there are going to be more than like one other good team in your league. And so maybe you come in third, come in fourth sometimes, you don't get that bye. But as opposed to saying, I could add this player, he gives me a very marginal increase in starting lineup points in the short term, but he blows up my trade value, he sucks away a roster spot, and I mean, he's probably actually not going to help, right? If my team is built well, how is that guy going to actually improve my scoring in the semis and the finals other than just randomly? And so you always want to build to try and get the bye every year. You're going to get upset sometimes. I mean, we've all experienced where you have the number one seed, you go undefeated, maybe even you have easily the best lineup, and then you have a bad week, and week 16 or week 17, you don't win. On the other hand, we've had teams that are 5th seed, 6 teams. They get in there and they get those upsets. Hopefully that balances out for you. But for it to balance out, you have to be in a good playoff position with all your teams every year.
That makes a lot of sense.
Guys, we got to give a quick plug. We're talking FFPC. I mean, we all love it. MyFFPC.com. We can't get enough of it, whether it's Triflex, Best Ball, playing for $1 million. I don't know, any kind of way you can play fantasy. You'll find it on myFFPC.com. If you're not already on the site, make sure you tag one of the goats on the screen and we'll hook you up with an exclusive sign-up offer bonus. Best ball tournaments, guys. Dynasties are flying. We're talking Triflex tonight. Go check it out. If you're not playing on FFPC, you're missing out big time.
Yeah, and before we get off of what we're just talking about with the age apex, if I can just jump in here, the running backs. Right now in Dynasty, there are so many running backs. Like all the good running backs are, in the age 25 plus range for the most part. How are you handling that in Dynasty, Shawn? Are you just totally avoiding them, or where are you going with them?
Yeah, well, I think you have to try and trade them at their peak for a lot, because they will bring back a lot. But the other issue is just that you had to actually trade them when they were 23, 24. And this is one of the problems with Najee Harris, because he basically starts out at that point. I mean, you've got to take the guys and actually play them as rookies and second-year players when they're 21, 22, trade them at 23, which just seems brutal, because there is a scenario where those guys go on to a Marshall Faulk or a LaDainian Tomlinson type of career, and then you feel silly forever. But your only other choice is to ride them to zero. And I do have a lot of Dalvin Cook right now. You can't move him for anything that actually makes sense, because it is going to destroy your starting lineup, and that's what matters. So in that situation with those guys, I think you have to build in such a way that you can ride specific running backs to zero if you don't get out in time, right? So the first thing you try to do is get out in time. If you don't, ride the player to zero, because, I mean, trading an Alvin Kamara, trading a Derrick Henry, trading a Dalvin Cook, I mean, you're just going to get peanuts back. And I think in those cases, it just makes more sense to have your lineup built in a way that you can withstand that. Now, if you come in and you take an orphan and you've got those guys on it, then the thing to do is just to work with a lot of your managers. And this is one of the reasons why you take over an orphan, you go in and you build relationships with people. And this is one of the reasons why, someone sends you a good trade offer, kind of try and take that, right? As opposed to trying to get that extra little pick. I mean, one of the things that's hard is, you'll make a counter offer to someone and they're like, man, this guy just won't take a fair offer. He's always got to win. But you're thinking into it on your side. You're like, I'm probably going to lose this if I don't get that extra little bit. So you're coming at it from two different perspectives. But yeah, I mean, you got to build those relationships up. And then if your team is bad, you do have to still move Henry and Kamara and Cook for guys that are work. But you have to understand it's probably not going to be what you want, because everyone is seeing that trajectory and, knowing that you're kind of stuck in this position where you can't get everything you'd like.
So what you're saying then, Shawn, is you're not going to trade us Christian McCaffrey or Dalvin Cook in the Pros versus Joes leagues for any kind of a discount.
Man, we've been trying. I mean, I love Dalvin Cook. Curtis does not believe in his ability to stick, which, I mean, he gets hurt all the time and he's old, so that only makes sense. So, I mean, we've been trying to move Cook. We can't. I mean, he just doesn't have the trade value that his points would suggest. And so that's tricky. I think you can move McCaffrey. I'm looking to move McCaffrey for huge deals in a variety of leagues. That part is also tricky because, the other side's like, we want McCaffrey, but we can't give our whole roster. And so you got to work with it. I've seen a lot of interesting McCaffrey trades over the last 3 months. It's definitely possible to move him if you have him. It's definitely possible to acquire him if you don't, but you got to work at it because it's a tricky deal to do.
Are you?
That was going to be my follow up to Dan's question was the McCaffrey one. I feel like that's like the one right now where it's like a fantasy litmus test, and you can still get a huge package for him. But you're right. It's interesting how some of the trades you're seeing as well. Go ahead, JD. Sorry about that.
No, I was going to say, what about my boy JT and our boy 1912 Fantasy? He's asking the same thing. He's the 1-1 right now. I mean, he's 23.3. He's peaking like no other mountain out there. What do you do with JT right now? Are you selling for value, or you just try to win as many ships as you can with him?
I mean,
we only give you the tough questions, Shawn.
that one is so fun, right? Because all he has to do to lose a ton of value is to come back with the exact same amazing season that he just had. In order to maintain or build value, he's got to add a ton of receptions onto his total. Now, I think that's possible. I wrote an article on Rotoviz to that effect, explaining, why I think that the evidence backs that, why I think history backs that. I argued that he's going to have even more breakaway runs, that he's going to have more touchdowns, that he has peak LaDainian Tomlinson upside. If you believe that, I mean, you've got to go try and get him in any situation where it makes any sense. But you can't destroy the whole rest of your roster for him for the reasons that I mentioned. I mean, the most likely thing that happens is you go spend all of this, all of your assets in different ways. And then, he gets hurt in week 2. And then not only does his trade value go down, but now you're looking at, okay, well, I'm going to chase it next year because I feel like the upside is still there. I'm going to chase it the next year because I feel like the upside is still there. It creates a real problem long-term. But I mean, Jonathan Taylor, truly historic generational player. If you can get him, you have to.
Are we good on that one, guys? I want to pivot to tight end if we could. We've talked about a lot of wide receivers and running backs. The tight end position is one of the most difficult ones to find value in. I feel like we could all agree on that. Are there any lessons we should learn from the production we found in Tunyon and Logan Thomas in 2020, and then in Dalton Schultz and Dawson Knox last season? And how are you assessing the tight end position where you're trying to find, potentially next big breakouts?
Yeah, I think there probably isn't, but it is interesting that with several of those guys, you've got elite quarterback play. And so, especially I think in best ball, if you're approaching that type of thing and you're looking at late rounds, if you see a situation where an elite quarterback could have any type of target share to his tight end, it makes sense to get some shares of that. You have Logan Thomas and Darren Waller, both guys who emerged late because of other things that were going on in their either lives or careers. You have position changes. You've got these players, we didn't get to see them as young guys because they were tight ends when they were 22, 23. That part of it is a little bit interesting. In Dynasty, I like having the starting lineup that I think gives me an advantage. And to do that, you have to have a good tight end. It's difficult to pay for a Travis Kelce, a George Kittle. And so I have a lot of guys on these rosters that I think have a chance to make the jump. So you're looking at people who come in as good prospects. You're looking at the players who are the most athletic. And like every year, and you guys were talking before the show about Trey McBride, in the Rotoviz rookie guide that we just released volume 3 of, we have him well above what his ADP has turned out to be. So that part is kind of interesting. With my co-managers, as I go through the second rounds of these drafts, I'm having to remind them that we already have like 3 or 4 tight ends because we're like, McBride has been the highest ranked player on our board for 5 picks. It's like, do we go in again? But I'm talking about that roster crunch. Can you draft a 4th or a 5th tight end when you only have 20 players total? So I've got a ton of Albert O, a ton of Pat Freiermuth. He was the pick on every team last year. Have a lot of Mike Gesicki because one of the most athletic tight ends in the NFL, a lot of Noah Fant, a lot of TJ Hawkinson. I mean, those are the guys where, again, if you have multiple players, I think your chances, if you have to get them a little bit early when they're cheap, if you just have a little bit of patience there, some of those guys are going to elevate and are going to be the next Kittle, the next Mark Andrews. I think that part of it is more likely to pay off for you than hitting these individual seasons on some of the late round sleepers.
Shawn, quick OTC. Hunter Henry or Wan'Dale Robinson?
It's got to be Wan'Dale, right? I mean,
of course it's got to be Wan'Dale. God damn, why would you ever draft Hunter Henry? Holy shit.
I drafted Hunter Henry once, Andrew, and Andrew sent me a nasty text message. We're going against each other in a startup, and he was like, why the Hunter Henry pick? I'm like, Andrew, it's the 16th round. I needed a backup tight end, and Andrew, I think, was very angry about it.
Was that Dynasty or best ball?
No, it was the triflex. But the thing was I had gotten drunk. This is a total tangent. I had gotten drunk in Dallas the week before Theo. And Dan calls me, goes, hey, I really want to go Albert O here in the 9th round of the triflex. And I go, hey, Dan, I'm shook from last year when Theo convinced me to take Hunter Henry in the 10th round of our triflex startup. And Dan, I can't do it again. You can't convince me. Now, if you look at that draft board that JD pulled up, Dan convinced me, but I'm like, if we get Hunter Henry on this pick, you're also not going to hear about it for forever. And then Theo, 3 rounds later, you go Hunter Henry over Wan'Dale. After we were texting about how great Wan'Dale was. Anyway.
I had gone David Bell before though.
True.
So my
That's
wide
true.
receiver depth was there. So
this was another pick that I had to hit the button on. Andrew just was not going to do it. But
Albert O or Wan'Dale?
No, Albert O.
Oh yeah, I lost my shit. I was like, we can't have a Hunter Henry situation again.
Albert O was a great pick for you guys.
I told
for sure.
Theo what I told Dan was I'm going to be out on Theo startups. I'm going to be out on Dan startups, and I'm only going to do startups with JD from now on. If we miss Henry and Alberto in back-to-back years,
that's it. That's it for sure.
Andrew's very unforgiving. But yeah, I think let's jump back into the tight ends just a little bit and some of those late guys like for me, Cole Kmet has been one of those smashes just in pretty much any format, whether you're talking dynasty, best ball, whatever. Just because of looking at how the target tree is likely to shake out in Chicago. He already had 95 targets. I mean, if you can get over 100 targets as a tight end, the odds are extremely good you're going to finish as top 6. And last year he had like 95 targets and didn't score a single touchdown. And I just can't see that happening again. So for me, Kmet is like one of those guys you're looking for. Alberto, in a different sort of way, kind of one of those guys you're looking for. What do you think, Shawn, on some of those guys? Are there late round targets you're really trying to snipe in the mid to late rounds on tight end?
Man, I need everybody to listen to that last segment because I have almost 100% Cole Kmet, and to the point where I need some diversification, I need some roster spots, I need trade partners. So Cole Kmet, he's vastly undervalued. I need to trade him, but I don't want to trade him at market because the market is not correct.
No. Definitely not.
shout out to Billy Muzio last week is very good with his projections on targets. And he has Cole Kmet at like 130 plus right now, potentially more for this season. So that's it's exciting. Yeah, I have plenty of Cole Kmet. I've jumped on Dan's recommendation of this year. I've tried to add as much Cole Kmet as possible. So that's good to hear. We're all on that one. I just wanted to pick your brain on your expectations. We touched on the names a little bit, but what are your expectations? We had so much movement at the wide receiver position, especially with some of these bigger names: Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown, and we'll throw Hollywood Brown in there. What are your expectations for those guys in their new situations?
I like all of those. I think that they should work out pretty well. When you look at Devontae Adams, right, and we've got some great tools to look at expected points for me, and it's even more helpful, obviously, at running back. But you look at the expected points, it gives you a feel for what the range of outcomes are. It translates the volume into scoring, which is what we care about. 18.7 over the last couple of years, but the fantasy points over expectation of 5.2 is where he gets into these crazy numbers. And so you say, well, I mean, Aaron Rodgers, that connection, some of the passes that Rodgers has thrown to him when he's not open until the very last second, when somehow the ball feathers down into his hands. Can Derek Carr do that? I mean, Derek Carr is good. He was actually the guy that I was going to mention in terms of sort of a QB2 target. You should probably have Derek Carr in every league that you possibly can, where the price isn't something that keeps you out of play. I mean, the price is obviously the thing that matters there, but Carr is good. Obviously, they played together before. That's the storyline. I think that the role with the Raiders is going to be better than people think. I think that Derek Carr is going to be better, but you're going to have a hard time matching this insane efficiency level he's had in the past. Tyreek Hill, the EP numbers and the fantasy points over expectation are a little bit lower. I mean, he's in that 16.5 range over the last 2 years. 2020, very efficient. 2021, they miss on almost all of those passes that they hit on the previous year. I think that he's going to do well in Miami. I think that attack is going to be very explosive, but he does move down into more of a second round type of value. Brown, the two Browns are interesting and exciting because AJ Brown goes from this really unfortunate low target situation as a passing attack to another one, but perhaps one that could have a little bit of this Baltimore Ravens-esque flip. Now, to expect that full flip would be hoping for something that's extremely unlikely, but they're going to be more pass heavy. He's going to be the perfect guy there to take their team to the next level. When you look at his EP over the last couple of years, just down there at 13, scores almost 3 points above that to get into that 16 range. I think the EP numbers can go up. And then Marquis Brown, I mean, all you have to do is think to yourself, like, do you really believe he's going to drop all of those touchdown passes again? Because there are going to be more of those. He's going to get open. The Cardinals offense is going to score a ton of points. The question and the interesting thing as fantasy managers is, how do you want to play it? What are the best prices? Who gets hurt and unlocks other guys? We have this Hopkins suspension, which I think is going to launch, obviously, James Conner and then Marquise Brown early. It should also launch Rondale Moore. We're dreaming and desperate for that to happen. Then Hopkins comes back, and you've got all of the guys, and then you have Trey McBride and Zach Ertz. I mean, we don't want to push the price up on Trey McBride if people are going to give him to us at 207, 208, 209. But I mean, you're talking about a guy who was unstoppable in college, runs mid 4.5s at his pro day, is going to be in this offense long-term with Kyler Murray. That again, they're going to be one of the 3 or 4 highest scoring teams in football, not just next year, but for a long time. So you want to have some exposure to those players. Brown is interesting because some of these trades I think were pretty fun, and they help because we talked at the very beginning of the show about zero running back and one of the problems. Well, the problem right now is that rounds 3 and 4, where you can usually dominate, are soft. And then 5 and 6 as a result, because these guys are pulled up, they're not as strong as you want to execute that. Having Brown change teams, move there, Bateman also move up as a result, it makes it more viable now than it was 2 weeks ago, because we are starting to get a little bit of definition, and not just definition, but definition in a good way, where these guys should score some points.
I wanted to touch on one recent article that you wrote that I think will help a lot of players that are currently in like the 4th round of their rookie drafts and it's starting to wind down a little bit here. Shawn writes a great article every August that is the 0 RB candidate list. It's terrific. Everybody reads it. But you also wrote this article here looking for the next Elijah Mitchell. Maybe you could share kind of your process to try to identify some of these super sleeper backs and maybe give us one of them.
So this is kind of embarrassing because I was in a big industry league where we're in the 4th round and I wanted one of these guys. And so I make I'm going to trade the 410 for the 401 and a future 4th. And I got all of these emails a little bit later asking me if I expected the league to fold or what was happening, because I had inadvertently actually traded like a 2024 first round pick in order to get up for the 401 and select Ty Chandler. And so I'm like, well, no, I'm really high on Ty Chandler being the guy who is going to be this year's Elijah Mitchell. No, the thing that's fun about these guys is this is a deep draft of smaller running backs who tested really well. And when you're talking about guys who are in that 210 and lighter range, you want them to be in the 4.3s. And at the very least, you want them to be that 4.45 and under. We have a variety of guys deep in drafts, but Chandler is somebody who breaks out after making this transfer. He has Khalil Herbert and Mitchell as his top 2 comps in the Rotoviz box score scout. He has Jamal Charles as his top physical comp in our workout explorer. Now, I mean, obviously he's not going to be Jamal Charles, but he might be vaguely like Elijah Mitchell. You're talking about somebody who came off a very good season, has this physical ability to make big plays, can be an NFL running back, better, I think, last year than people realize. And there are 3 or 4 names kind of in that range, but I also like the fit, right? Because you have Alexander Mattison. He's been this amazing handcuff, but part of that is that it's been so awesome for him, but it's been fluky, right? Because for the last 5 games where he's played at least 50% of the snaps, he's finished as an RB1. I mean, you wouldn't expect a superstar to do that. And so, I mean, his actual level is far below that. You look at some of the advanced stats, you pull it up in our advanced stat tool, and you can see that, I mean, Dalvin Cook, one of the things that's cool about him, and I'm probably a little bit on an island here, but I really emphasize the pre-contact numbers for the runners. They're actually not as priced into the cost on backs as the after contact numbers are that people, I mean, for good reason, but people really like to look at. Dalvin Cook, one of the best before contact runners in all of football. Alexander Mattison, one of the worst. If Cook gets hurt at this point, I mean, you're looking at situations where, I mean, it could be somebody else other than Mattison who goes in there and puts up the points. I think that you have deep in your draft, I mean, obviously you're not going to pay big prices for this, but you have a guy here who could go in and could be a starter and could get some of the high value touches that we're all looking for in fantasy.
I bet Wheeler was trying to get my in the OG, which is like a basic 1 QB dynasty, but it's the most competitive, I'd say, in the GOAT leagues. I was on the clock at the 503 in this rookie draft, and he wanted my 503. I'm pretty sure he'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but he was sending me like a 2023. I wanted his 2023 4th, and he didn't take it, so I took Ty Chandler at 503. I mean, I feel good about it.
Yeah, feeling better now, huh?
Feel even better now. Exactly. Thanks, Theo.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Ty Chandler's good, but Bryant Kovacs, who you're really going to want. I'm just giving Shawn a hard time.
Dan loves those deep guys in the.
I do. I like Bryant Kovac a lot as well. I think the Vikings hit a couple really good late round, basically free options with Chandler and Bryant Kovac was basically free, undrafted free agent.
There's a couple of fun running backs, when you look at Jerome Ford, like the Ingrams, in those late rounds, they're fun to take shots on.
It's the ultimate galaxy brain draft, guys. There's lots of running backs we can see just coming through.
Exactly. All right, we'll give a quick plug before, and I didn't even ask our guests. Shawn, did you have like a hard out or anything? We just we don't want to keep you longer than we. Awesome, guys. Underdog Fantasy. We're talking FFPC. You don't want to miss anything on the FFPC, but you want to complement it with some underdog and just get the action going on your mobiles, your laptops. They got a monster tourney right now. The Best Ball Mania 3 playing with $10 million in prizes, $1 million to the highest scoring team through round 1. And then I believe it's another $1 million, correct me if I'm wrong, for the grand champion. Is that correct, boys?
It sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I think that's what it is.
All right. Beautiful.
You guys, it's a lot of money, more than you're going to spend in a year.
Ton of money. Yeah. And like I say, it's wife-changing money. It's the type of money that even your girlfriend or your wife will appreciate you playing fantasy football once you get her that Hermes purse or whatever it is that she wants, as her souvenirs for your wins. But and if you're in other sports, guys, the NHL playoffs are on right now, the NBA playoffs, baseball started. They got fun for all the sports. Underdog right now, use the code DISTRICT for your first sign-up bonus of up to $100 in your face.
Did I see that they're doing F1 now too? Am I crazy? Maybe I should fact check myself, because if so, JD, we got to start up an F1 DM. So
dude, I'm all about it. I'm F1
download from you.
My wife and I, F1 is like, it's the only sport I can really get her into. She's super into it. So we are like, we watch practice, qualifying. It's a whole weekend event for us here in
Well, let me tell you this, JD. Either they're doing it now or I dreamed it. And if they're not doing it, we're going to sell them the idea.
Well, I know, there you go. I know DraftKings had one, but
got to be a t-shirt on this, Andrew. There's got to be a t-shirt.
Print the damn shirt.
Yep.
Yeah, we got a handful of shirts right now in the waiting list to get printed.
They're all my intern's notepad right now. Sean, they said they'd give me an intern, and they're gonna have to follow me around and like mass ideas. They're gonna screen the ideas and then implement the best ones.
It's perfect.
Sean, I have a question for you. As you could tell, we're all degenerates on here. And I couldn't get the 250 Triflex to start for the life of me. That wasn't the best ball. But I noticed the best ball dynasty kept refilling. And we're a little hesitant on the best balls. I mean, we've all tried it. We've all been in leagues with the dynasty best balls. I want to know, like, sell me on the dynasty best ball aspect. I feel like there's either something I'm missing. I just feel like once you do the draft, it's hard to really stay engaged in the league. I'm wondering if you have a different experience with that.
Well, yeah, both of those things are true. One of the things that I found was that I drafted a team in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament redraft last year with Colin Kelly on Rotoviz Overtime with our managing editor at Rotoviz, Blair Andrews, and that team did well and was advancing through the playoffs. And then I found it was actually very easy to follow, as opposed to the vast majority of it. Every once in a while you check in and you're like, okay, so I guess these guys I drafted a long time ago have scored points and my team is toward the top. That's great. When the team does well, it does become a lot of fun. And I think Dynasty is so fun that you want to play as much as you can, and sometimes you just can't manage all of the teams. I mean, the last 72 hours have been unbelievable because I have basically been in Rotoviz Triflex rookie drafts the entire time, sending hundreds of trade offers. In one of the leagues, Ben and I actually were able to move quite a bit. We made like 5 first-round trades, which is pretty impressive because there aren't that many actual players in one first round. And that's incredibly exciting. And yet at the same time, it does wear you down a little bit. And then you get into the regular season, you're like, I spent like entire days of my life back in May doing this. And now I don't have time to do waivers or to set the starting lineup. I mean, that part of it is tricky. And so I think that if you add some best balls in here, it's perfect because you can just do more. And that's what we're kind of all looking for, is to be able to do more without it like costing us our jobs. I mean, I'm trying to like get my article published today. Like, I hope there aren't mistakes in it because I've got to go back and make 5 more trade offers. So I think that when you're looking at that and you're thinking about the regular season, best ball is awesome because you get to do all the fun of drafting and trading at that point. And then you don't have to do the hours and hours in season. It depends a little bit on how many leagues you have, but like you mentioned, degenerates, I'm sure we all have, 30, 40, 50 teams. And, you get to Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, and it's just like, I don't want to get up and do 10 hours worth of waivers. Best ball, you don't have to. So, I mean, it's a pretty huge selling point.
I just figure if anyone could sell me on it, it's Shawn Siegele, right? And I want to be sold on it because I want to degen into them,
One question, one comment. Out of 100 trade offers, how many of them were initiated by you versus Ben? Is it like 90-10 split?
Well,
95-5, 75-25?
Yeah, I mean, in each of these leagues, there'll be different people who are more responsible for some portion of it, and so I sent out most of the trade offers, but it's
99-1.
I love doing these co-managed teams. It's both the best and the worst. It's like because you get to go through all of this with one of your best friends. I'm doing one with Blair, one with Monty, one with Ben, and I mean, I think the teams end up being better. It's more fun, but it is exhausting, right? Because okay, so I got this great deal. I got to run it by this person. I got to run it by that person. So that part of it can be tricky as well. But I mean, you can play more leagues if you co-manage with your best friends. And the Triflex, it goes up to the 1250. I've had people tell me, I can't verify this, but I've had people tell me the 1250 is softer. And so,
I think he's trying to entice you guys, Theo, and I think he's trying to get you guys to go up a level.
Well, my comment was going to be I had flight delays getting to where I'm going, and Theo, I was just like, I would call Theo every couple hours. He's talk to me. It was and Theo, you nailed it. If it wasn't for all those rookie drafts on our Triflex, the 1250 that you and I are co-managing, I absolutely would have even lost my shit more at the airlines than I did.
Andrew almost enjoys the flight delay because he gets to look at his dynasty roster even more with perfect internet and all that.
That's right.
Such a degen.
And Dan knows I was antagonizing all my leagues. I was just hitting with the hashtag not a poor. I made sure every single one of them knew that I was rich enough to buy in-flight Wi-Fi. Whenever I see, as a total side note, whenever I see someone being like, "Hey guys, sorry, my pick's gonna come in a couple hours. I'm about to board a flight," I just think, "Hey, you're in a fucking 750. Just buy the in-flight Wi-Fi." Or, by the way, I don't believe in that for a second. They just want to sit on the clock for a little bit longer. So, anyway, nevertheless,
I totally do it so I can sit on the clock. I don't care,
Yeah, just tell them, "Hey, I'm sitting on the clock." Not, "Hey, I'm boarding a flight. Sorry, guys, I'm out of communication." Just like, "Hey, I'm sitting here."
Yeah, without a doubt. And one of the things, I think one of the keys to co-managing leagues, because we all do it, is if one player is going to say no, don't check with the other one. I mean, if it's a no for you, it's a no, right? Because unless it's a very rare circumstance, the other player is probably not going to overrule you or talk you into it or whatever, But if you're looking at something, you're going, yeah, that's an obvious no. You can cut a lot of the communication. Just, I'll send a note to JD all the time. JD, I'm just gonna decline this trade because I don't want to do it. And he does the same thing. He'll decline trades because he doesn't want to do it. And we both know we're not going to try to talk each other into it. It's more the ones that we're like, oh, maybe that's an interesting trade. Those are the ones we're going to talk about.
And I think it is great to have partners on teams. Not for all of them, but for some. When we start talking about high volume of teams and Shawn's in 30 or 40 teams, even like a waivers where I'll handle waivers on the first run, and then Andrew might handle them for the second run, setting lineups when one person's not available. It does help even at the super competitive leagues. And to Shawn's point on the softness of occasional high stakes leagues, there may or may not have been a Malik Willis go off the board at a 106 in a 1250 that we will not name.
Damn.
Yeah. So it happens. And that allowed Andrew and I to get Jameson Williams at 7 overall.
Shawn, we were trying to move up one pick. We had 105 and 107. We were trying to move up one pick just so we can go Wilson Jameson. And it was a small trade. We were going to offer him Theo said offer him the third. We didn't have a third. I offered him the fourth, and Dan knows I probably would have done that anyway. Somebody says offer the third. I'm going to offer the fourth or fifth. We didn't. The guy declined, and he snap picked Malik Willis. Is like, well, okay, you're an idiot. We gave it free money. You could have just had Malik Willis and a pick. Anyways,
Yeah. So it does happen. It does happen.
Yeah.
I got a question for Shawn, and you guys can all jump in after, but we're talking trades while we're drafting, especially with like these Triflex startups, with these big money leagues. We're talking about rounds we want to move into, move back to. Shawn, any tips or any ideas on if you're one of these players right now in these startups, you want to move back? Any kind of guidelines with regards to these trades? Like some people say, if you're going to move for future picks, at least get something that's going to pay you now. Or do you have any kind of guidelines that you go to, or any tips just on how to get this movement through in these startups if you're someone listening right now?
Well, you guys mentioned earlier kind of some of those ranges that are pretty strong. Well, the thing I would say is if you're in a startup and you're moving back, move back and not out, right? Because you can move back a number of rounds, pick up that future first, and still pick a guy who is good. And you'll build out a team that's pretty strong. And it'll fast forward your build by, at least a year, if not more, by doing that, as opposed to trading out of, say, round 6. You move back from round 2 to round 7 or what have you. And you just have to work through it with different people. One of the things that is frustrating is that there's a really bad trade that happens at the very beginning, and then everybody anchors to that. Then that can make the whole draft difficult because no one wants to get worse value. And yet, as you're trying to move through the draft, you're like, I can't match that trade because it's not a good trade. And so I think you just have to have a lot of discussions and explain kind of what you're trying to do, why it works for you, how it works for them. The thing that I find is that if you really are trying to work a trade that helps both sides, trades should be a win-win for you and a loss for the other 10. Every time that you see trade execution come through and you weren't involved in it, you should feel like you just lost, right? Because in all likelihood you did. It was either a win-win for those two teams, or it was a win-lose, which is in some cases even worse because the team that won, now they really have gained ground on you. And so you want to work through and make it so that you're the person people come to because they know that you will try and help them accomplish their objectives. You'll work within the general framework of what the market is. That doesn't mean that you're going to go to a trade calculator and say, okay, this is the trade. This is what the trade calculator says. Because I always try to explain to people, like, these are the prices that I have on the players. It's not necessarily market. The reason I have them in the first place is because I'm above market on them. And even if I'm willing to move them, I'm still above market on most of my guys. And I'm assuming the reason you're coming to me is because you're also above market. Now, there may be somebody on your team that we're both above market on too, and so we can make that match, but it has to be something like that. You can't go to some third-party app and say, okay, this is what we're going to make the price on. Then, trade discussions derail pretty quickly because you have to have the flexibility to actually work what the values are for the two people involved, not some, arbitrary other element. But I think as you go through that, if you are comfortable with how you're building your team, you're moving back into ranges you still like, you're going to come out ahead. We do have a cool setup with our trade rankings, or our dynasty rankings on the site, where we have them tiered, and the tiers represent what we think that the players are worth in terms of picks. And so you can go through and get a sense from those tiers, at least where we would move the different people. And that's going to give you sort of a rough trade approximation, as well as a ranking, and as well as the tiers, which people obviously like tiers. And so, if you're trying to get a sense of how we would structure the drafts, you can go to that tool. And I think the tier element of it is pretty helpful.
I love that. I was looking at a couple of trades. I'm not going to mention the first one because it's just not a realistic trade to get. But I was looking to move down from the 106 to that early mid second. And I think that trade calculator, or trade value chart, or whatever you want to call it, Shawn, just to give you credit, was like really helpful because especially when you put like players' names to it. I think that, I was trying to go 106 for like a 203 plus a 2023 first, which is about my break even part. Maybe like 205 would have been my break even. But I love doing that, right? Because you replace a pick with a name. Maybe you wouldn't, and I got no takers, absolutely no takers. But then you replace names, and I ended up going Kyler at the 106. If I do Kyler for Trevor Lawrence in a 2023 first, I think that gets done all day long. I think that somebody with Trevor Lawrence would be willing to pay that. But in the draft, when these had pick values to them, nobody was willing to do that. So I just thought that was really interesting, but it was a very helpful guide to kind of think about those tiers and kind of how many 2023 first, seconds, or whatever it was, is a player worth. So I thought that was really helpful as it guided me through the first couple of rounds there.
All right, guys, we're at $130. Sorry, Shawn, go ahead.
Well, and one of the things I think can be helpful too is I think a lot of times people want to accomplish the entire objective with one move, and that can be nice because not everybody wants to spend all day and all night with it. But if you do have fun with it and you do have the time to make some of the moves, you move down a little bit and then you can move down a little bit further. You take the small trade. Sometimes the big trade isn't there, but if you have these, I mean, you don't always have to go by the trade value either. If you actually have two guys even, move back, even if you don't get much, then maybe the pool has gotten shallower now. Now maybe somebody wants to come up and make the move, or maybe they don't, but you can get more value out of it if you move multiple times. And this is another reason why I try to be as friendly as possible with all of this stuff. I mean, number one, obviously, is just good practice being a good person. But if I'm making a lot of little trades that takes a long time, I don't want people to get too frustrated with me for being on the clock all day.
I wanted to throw this to finish this off. I know we're at $130 here. We try to keep it within. We say we try to keep it within an hour, but it's really $130. I think is really our time, 90 minutes. But Famous Jay, I think Andrew and I. Our initial reaction is we prefer Michael Carter here. He's saying he traded Michael Carter for the 301 and then he drafted Kyron Williams, good value. Just your thoughts on the trade and then the move, like just on a more macro level, maybe people making moves that are not necessarily moving them forward, or is that the case here for you, or do you think this is a valid trade?
I think that Carter for the 301 is interesting because there are some players going in the third round who have more value. And I do think that moving out of running backs who have been hit and or need a specific scenario to take place now in order to score fantasy points or be in a starting lineup, that part makes sense. It's going to be very difficult for Michael Carter to ever be a guy who really ascends long-term. I mean, in best ball, Carter's a fantastic pick because if Breece Hall gets hit in the season, then Michael Carter could be a league winner. And there is an element of that helps you in Dynasty as well, especially if you built these teams that I have with my co-managers where we essentially have no running backs. So anybody would help. I think Kyron Williams as the selection is a little bit tricky. He's going more in the fourth. He probably is more of a fourth round type of player. He needs similar types of things to happen and is probably a little bit lesser talent than Carter. I like him a lot as a player. I was glad that his pro day rehabbed some of his value and showed that he actually is an NFL athlete. Now, not a great NFL athlete, but someone who can play. He brings a lot of skills to the table. I don't think it's impossible for this to work out, but you can probably use the 301 to either draft someone else or to move back, still get Kyron Williams and get some other things.
Anything to add, guys, to the trade or?
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, no, I think Shawn nailed it. Shawn nailed it on that one.
I think it's just the Kyron. I don't mind the trade, but I think it's just the Kyron Williams pick. And that's it.
Shawn, I think the appreciation for everything you do for the industry is awesome. I mean, I see your name on an article, and for me, it's definitely a new tab on my millions of tabs that are open because I want to make sure that I'm gonna read through it. I love your work, and Stealing Bananas, just the dynamic you have on that show, the two of you is awesome, and the discussions you guys get into is great. Anything else you want to share with the people? Remind them where they can find you, all your goodness that maybe I didn't mention before we close this out.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. That's really more than I deserve, but I appreciate it very much. Yeah, Ben and I have a blast with Stealing Bananas. We'd love for anybody to come listen there. Colin Kelly and I record Rotoviz Overtime 3 times a week, and we've had some pretty fun guests, impressive guests on recently. Some of those episodes are pretty evergreen in terms of how it relates to the rookies. We'll have more episodes this week. The Rotoviz Rookie Guide just came out. 3 volumes of that, rankings, mocks, all that kind of thing. Some advanced analytics from Blair, Travis May, Dave Cabin, Curtis Patrick. We'd love you to come check out Rotoviz. Some of the cool things mentioned during the show. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk with you guys and go through some of those things, tease a few of the things that we do. It's been a blast. Thank you guys for having me on.
Awesome, Shawn.
Yeah, we love having you in Wheeler. You said it there, brother. Stealing bananas is pure fire, and you guys have been fire tonight in the chat. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Shawn, all the goodness. We appreciate your time and all of that. You guys see them all around me. Dan, the overhyped sleeper, no Eon Nien, the OG fantasy Theo, Andrew AMS Schellenberg, hanging out in hotels in a La Quinta near you, Theo. Before we go out, just remind the peeps anything exciting. Do we have anything exciting coming up? I don't know,
So we have Ian Hartitz coming on soon, and then we also have a rookie draft review show where it's going to be hopefully the four of us, but at least three of us talking about the picks, a little bit more of the picks we made actually while on the clock, and we'll have a couple of high stakes dynasty players joining us, for some segments, and then we're going to continue a few more of the dynasty focused shows. And then we have a little bit more pivot to redraft. We're going to have a lot of the high stakes players that, you listened to on the show, last summer and this past year coming back on, and a couple of new ones as well. So we're going to have some really exciting, May and June podcasts in the GOAT District.
For sure, man, and we'll sprinkle in some balling and some
absolutely
here and there.
We are drafting for sure.
All these big tourneys, and you guys hear all the drafts we're doing right now. We'll make sure we do some reviews on some of those, even if we're not doing necessarily the live action. Andrew, I feel like you have something just hanging on the tip of your tongue to drop.
No, we got to figure out scheduling conflicts. We got to do the review of our Revelations draft that we did at FFPC last Friday.
That's right.
Shoot your shot. Shawn, we got to do some collabo content for our $500,000 Billies. We're doing some of the main events too. So you got to draft with us this summer. Now you're a recurring guest. You're almost obligated to do that with us. And hey, good news for you, Shawn. I was talking to a coworker today and trying to explain what I'm doing here right now. I said that this is Seinfeld, right? Dan, JD, and Theo are Elaine, Jerry, and George. The question for the people, food for thought for the next time I come on. Am I the Kramer or am I the Newman? I don't know. You guys tell me, but I think it's something to be decided here. So you got a rare treat, Shawn, with showing up here.
Definitely the Kramer. There's no question.
Yeah.
I just picture when he just opens the door, he just comes in the door.
He comes sliding right in.
That's Andrew, man. We got to end on that, guys. Use the code District on Underdog. Tag us for FFPC, myffpc.com. Some sign us bonus. Get your GOAT gear. I wear this hat all the time just because it's comfy, guys. It's not my only one. I got tons, but it's my favorite one. It's the most comfortable. Check it out, ViridianGlobal.com. Guys, we'll check you all later.
GOAT District, the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offers the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back. Now all of a sudden, they don't make any sense. Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man. Y'all know what to do. It's the and I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
Awesome time, fellas. That was really good.
Yeah, that was great.
Fun. Appreciate
I'm gonna go pregame the Stars game now. So I love you all. I'll see you all soon.
Have fun with the game.
Bye, Theo. I'll call you later. See you, bye.
Yep.
All right.
Have fun,
later, Andrew. All right.
Yeah,
so Shawn, we got to figure out a trade in PVJ if you got a minute.
How much time
still
do we have left?
Still live if you guys want to.
Yeah, let's do it. 2 hours.
Do the trade live. There you go.
Let's do it.
Do the live trade talk.
So this is the 250 pros versus Joes. Dan and I are sharing this, and we're on the clock at 2:07. What's the offer, Dan? Where are we at with this?
Let's see. Shawn and Curtis have offered their 2023 second for this pick, the 207, which I think is, definitely a fair offer. But we're gonna see if we can, we're trying to help you get off the hook, but we got to get some help from you getting off the hook at running back. We are definitely on the hook at running back. What would you think about something involving Rashad Penny on this pick?
What running backs do you have right now?
Oh God, they're awful.
Yes.
Do I have to admit it on live and on air? We have Nyheim Hines, Melvin Gordon, Keyshawn Vaughn, Zamir White, and Chris Carson. That's pretty bad, isn't it?
Well, it's not ideal for the regular Superflex version. It sounds loaded for what I have in the triplex in some places, but
so yeah. So Rashad Penny would be a player of interest to us here. Is there any way we can work that into the deal?
Well, the problem that we have here is that Penny did win a lot of money for us in best ball at the end of last season. So there's that good feeling. He's also one of Curtis's favorites. And so it's a little bit trickier to move your co-manager's guy. Obviously, it becomes easier now that they have Kenneth Walker. And so what would be the structure that you're looking for there in terms of the pick? Is it something where, we've kind of moved into a situation where we don't have a lot of picks in this draft. It's almost the exact opposite of what I'm dealing with in all of the triflexes, where I'm going to end up with like 30 and have to somehow shave 10 guys everywhere. We're going to end up just around the starting lineup. And that means that during the course of the offseason, the team won't be very deep.
What about if we moved a couple, like a couple later picks in this one, and it involved Penny somehow? So, because we probably have more picks than what we need, I would say. Don't you think?
What if we paired Penny with your 23 second and then sent back I got too many screens. Let me go back to where I had our rosters. Yeah, here we go. And then we send back like the 207, our 23 third, and like a third, like a 303 or 304 that we have coming up.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm looking at my offer here. So we offered you, basically just our 2023 second for the 207, which obviously there are some interesting guys here. Next year's draft could be better and deeper. That's kind of the little hook potentially.
Right.
I'm sorry, JD, say again what you were saying.
So I was saying like the 207, basically Penny and your 23 second for the 207, your 23 third, and then
our 23 third, right?
Our 23 third, and then we have the 304. What was it, Dan? I keep switching my screen over. 303 and 304. One of those. So basically the 207, the 303, and your 2023 third for Penny and your 23 second.
I like that. Let me. I think that should work. I got to run it by Curtis because he's
for sure
he is the biggest Penny fan, but that sounds very promising. We did, as I mentioned on the show, make the really gross pick. I think the least exciting first round pick I've ever made in Dynasty when we selected James Cook at the 111 to pair with Devin Singletary. I think Singletary is the guy. We do have McCaffrey and Cook, and we've got Devontae Adams and Jamar Chase. So we like the starters, but
Mhm.
Curtis and I were talking about this earlier, where it's a very weird team for us, where it's very starting lineup heavy. We don't have a lot of depth. We don't have a lot of future picks. It's almost like a bizarro team for us. But because of those moves we made in the startup, we've been chasing it ever since. So we're going to continue to chase it at least for one more year, because we can't let McCaffrey and Cook go without making a run. So that sounds exciting to me. I'll pass that along to him. I think that we can get one done there. And guys, it's been so awesome to chat with you. I better let you go at this point. I am on the clock everywhere at some point.
Yep.
We have 2 hours to make that deal work, because we have 2 hours on the clock. FYI.
Great time, Shawn. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yep. Thanks for coming
Sean.
on.
You're
I
awesome,
appreciate it,
man.
guys. Talk to you
Appreciate
soon.
it, brother.
Yep.
Take care.
Catch you later.
We can